What kind of person throws a rock at a kid's therapy dog and thinks they'll get away with it? Let me tell you about a neighborhood showdown that turned a quiet suburb into a battleground for compassion, where one dog's loyalty sparked a revolution. It was a crisp morning, the kind where the sun paints everything golden, and a single dad, was walking with his son, Ethan, and their therapy dog, Max, toward the community center. Their neighborhood, with its perfect lawns and cookie-cutter houses, looked like it belonged on a postcard. But beneath the surface, it was ruled by an iron fist disguised as HOA regulations. The still adjusting to raising Ethan alone, kept his guard up. He knew the place had its quirks, nosy neighbors, petty rules, but he wasn't ready for what was coming. Ethan, who's autistic, gripped Max's leash tightly, his steps steady thanks to the dog's calming presence. Max wasn't just a pet, he was Ethan's anchor, a furry shield against a world that could feel like too much. That day, they were headed to the HOA center to grab some newsletters, maybe check the bulletin board. Routine stuff. Boring, even. Until Susan showed up. Susan was the HOA's self-proclaimed queen, the kind of person who'd measure your grass with a ruler and send you a citation if it was half an inch too long. Her walk was all business, her eyes narrowing as she zeroed in on Max. "Your dog's been digging in the flower beds again," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is unacceptable." The blinked, caught off guard. "That's not true," he said, keeping his tone even. "Max has been with Ethan all morning. He doesn't do that." But Susan wasn't listening. Her face twisted with that righteous fury you see in people who think they're never wrong. Then, in a move that sucked the air out of everyone watching, she bent down, grabbed a rock from the path, and chucked it at Max. The rock sailed through the air, a cold, calculated shot. Gasps rippled from the handful of neighbors nearby. Max, quick as a whip, dodged it, his instincts kicking in. For a second, everything froze. The heart pounding, Ethan's eyes wide, the crowd holding its breath. Susan stood there, unapologetic, her fists clenched like she was ready for round two. But this wasn't just about a rock. It was about Ethan, who needed Max to navigate his world. It was about a community suffocating under Susan's rules. The pulled Ethan close, his protective instincts roaring. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice low but burning. Susan didn't flinch. "Rules are rules," she said, like that justified everything. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and anger. This wasn't just a spat, it was a line in the sand. Susan's tyranny, her obsession with control, had gone too far. As the and Ethan headed home, the morning's ugliness clung to them. Their house, usually a safe haven where Ethan could unwind with Max by his side, felt different. Tainted. The mind churned with frustration, a slow boil of rage at Susan's cruelty. She wasn't just the HOA's enforcer, she was the symbol of every petty power trip, every rule that valued order over humanity. Targeting Max, Ethan's lifeline, wasn't just wrong, it was personal. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Neighbors who'd seen it went from whispering to talking openly, their stories piling up. Susan had fined Mrs. Carter for a mailbox that was too colorful. She'd harassed the Gwynn family over a basketball hoop. People were fed up, and Susan's rock-throwing stunt was the spark they needed. By evening, neighbors were knocking on the door, offering support, sharing their own grudges. "She's gone too far," said Mr. Patel, his voice tight. "We're with you." The didn't ask for this. He was just a dad trying to keep things together for Ethan. But as the day wore on, he felt a shift. He wasn't alone. The neighborhood, long silenced by Susan's reign, was waking up. People who'd once avoided eye contact were now swapping stories in driveways, their voices alive with possibility. Susan, meanwhile, doubled down. Memos flew out, citations piled up, each one a desperate grab to keep her grip. But every letter she sent only fueled the fire, turning her ironclad authority into a house of cards. The next day's HOA meeting was electric. The community center's meeting room, usually half empty, was packed. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of anticipation. Susan sat at the head table, her stack of notes as crisp as her attitude, but there was a crack in her usual confidence. DVYD walked in with Ethan and Max, their presence drawing nods from allies and glares from Susan's loyalists. Ethan held Max's leash, the dog's calm eyes scanning the room like he knew something big was brewing. The meeting started with the usual minutes approved, budgets skimmed, but the real fight came when Susan brought up the dog incident. The room erupted. Mrs. Larson, a retiree with a soft spot for Ethan, stood first. "I've had enough of your bullying," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You fined me for a bird feeder last month. Now you're throwing rocks at a child's dog?" Applause broke out, bold and unapologetic. Not everyone agreed. Mr. Reynolds, Susan's neighbor and a stickler for rules, stood up. "Order keeps this place valuable," he said, his tone pleading. "Without rules, we'd fall apart." DVYD felt a pang. Property values? Over Ethan's well-being? But he stayed quiet, watching the room. Some faces were hard, loyal to Susan's vision of perfection. Others softened, torn between fear of change and a hunger for something better. Then Susan took the floor, her voice smooth but commanding. "We can't let exceptions ruin our standards," she said, glancing at DVYD. "One slip, and it's chaos." Her words were a slap, dismissing Ethan's needs like they were nothing. DVYD's chest tightened. He couldn't stay silent. Standing, he faced the room, his voice steady but raw. "This isn't about rules. It's about decency. Ethan needs Max. We all have needs. Why should we sacrifice compassion for some checklist?" The room hushed, his words sinking in. Nods spread, quiet at first, then bolder. Susan's face tightened, but DVYD saw the tide turning. The debate raged on, voices clashing, but when the meeting ended, one thing was clear: the neighborhood was splitting. Susan's grip was slipping, and DVYD, whether he wanted it or not, was becoming the voice of something new. A few days later, DVYD, Ethan, and Max were back at the HOA Center for paperwork. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Sure enough, Susan appeared, her eyes locked on them. She marched over, launching into another rant about standards and unruly pets. Her voice grew sharper, oblivious to Ethan's tightening grip on Max's leash. The boy's breathing quickened, his anxiety spiking. Max sensed it instantly. What happened next was like something out of a movie. Max, calm and loyal, suddenly lunged not to attack, but to protect. His body moved like lightning, planting himself between Ethan and Max. The force of his leap caught Susan off guard. She stumbled, arms flailing, and with a spectacular splash, landed in the community center's fountain. The courtyard went silent. Neighbors froze, jaws dropped. Water poured off Susan as she sputtered, her usual polish drowned in humiliation. Max, back by Ethan's side, looked unfazed, like he'd just done his job. DVYD rushed to Ethan, checking on his son, but he couldn't help the flicker of satisfaction at Susan's fall. The crowd stirred, some rushed to help her, others hid smirks. It wasn't just a dunking. It was a symbol. That splash changed everything. Susan's aura of untouchability shattered, her authority leaking away with the water. By nightfall, the story was everywhere, each retelling chipping at her power. Neighbors who'd once bowed to her started questioning. Was her way really the only way? DVYD, now a reluctant figurehead, saw his chance. At an impromptu gathering, he spoke to the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of a dad who'd had enough. "This place is our home, not a prison. We're more than rules. We're people. Ethan needs Max, just like we all need each other." His words hit hard. People nodded, some teary-eyed. Even Susan's supporters wavered, her fountain flop making her less a queen and more a cautionary tale. The next HOA meeting was a turning point. The room buzzed with purpose, chairs filled with neighbors ready to act. Susan tried to rally, but her voice faltered, drowned by a community done with fear. The VYD stood again, not as a hero, but as one of them. "Let's build a place where everyone belongs," he said. "Where Ethan and Max aren't exceptions, but family." The vote was overwhelming. Susan's rigid policies were out. A new committee formed, focused on fairness, not control. The VYD, to his surprise, was asked to lead. He accepted, determined to make the neighborhood a true community. Over time, the changes took root. Gardens bloomed wilder, kids played freer, and neighbors truly talked. Max became a local legend, his loyalty a reminder that even a dog could spark change. Susan faded into the background, her memos ignored, her influence gone. The neighborhood, once stifled, came alive. The VYD, Ethan, and Max walked its paths, no longer outsiders but part of something bigger. It started with a rock and a splash, but it ended with a community that chose heart over rules, proving that sometimes, the smallest fights like one dog stand can change everything.